Buying a car in the USA, how different can it be? Well, in some cases, not very different. You transfer money, you get finance, you receive a car. In lots of other ways, there's massive differences, at least for somebody coming from the UK and being really used to buying in the UK system. I think me and Selena probably bought and sold between 12 and 15 cars in the last 8 to 10 years. So we're fairly experienced from both dealerships and private sellers. When we arrived in the US 3 years ago, time has flown by. We actually bought a car within, may have even been a week, I can't really remember now, of arriving. And it was a fairly easy process, but there were some quirks. And some of the stuff that we've picked up since is very different because the car that we bought was within the same state and was about 10 miles from our home. So we just went to a dealership, we paid a deposit, we paid the rest in cash, I think, or a bank transfer, and then we received the car. But we didn't really pay attention to exactly what was happening through that process. However, in the past 3 weeks, I've been spending a lot of time looking at a new car and learning a lot about the buying process. And there's a lot of things that I missed the first time round, and there's a lot of things I've learned since I've been looking nationally across the US and different states that I think would be useful for people that are either coming here looking to buy a car or recently arrived and looking to buy a new car. Also, I think some Americans that may not know this stuff exists. Number one on the list is taxes. This is really confusing, I find, and it's very different to how we do things in the UK. So first up, in the UK, the price you see on the car is the price you pay. If tax, or VAT, value added tax, is supposed to be included in the price because it's a new car or a fairly new car, the price you see on the windshield or online includes that amount. If you buy a car from a second-hand dealer or your friend or somebody on Craigslist or wherever it happens to be, there is no tax included in that transaction. The USA, that's very different. The majority of states, it doesn't matter how old the car is, you have to pay tax on that. And the way they capture the tax is at the point of registration, so you can't even avoid it. There are some exceptions to this. So there are some states, I think Delaware, Oregon, where you don't pay sales tax. Now, a lot of people would think, well, just buy the car there. But as I mentioned, because you pay tax at point of registration and you register the car in your state, you can buy a car in Delaware with no tax. Once you bring it home, you go to register it to get your plates, tax is applied. The tax rates vary from a couple of percent up to about 10 or 11% if you're in California. In Nevada, it's about 8.38%, give or take. And usually, up until this week, my understanding was because you pay it on registration, if you were to buy a car from a dealership in Texas or New Jersey, they collect the money from you and they pay the taxes and registration to Nevada, and then your plates get sent out to you. However, that isn't always the case. I wanted to buy a car from California, and what they told me was because I intend to collect the car, they were going to apply California tax, which was about 10.25%. And then I was not due a refund when I register it in Nevada. And I thought this was completely wrong because up until then, every other dealership that I'd spoken to had not mentioned this. They just said you've got to pay Nevada taxes. And in fact, it's the county tax. So we would pay Clark County taxes. So I questioned it and I did some research, and actually the dealership was completely correct. Unless you're having the car delivered to you, so the wheels do not touch the street in California, you must pay Californian taxes, which was 2 and a bit percent or 2% more than it was here in Nevada. And I said, absolutely not. They offered me a delivery service, which I'll come on to within another point, but it was far too expensive. So be aware, the price you see on a vehicle or online for the vehicle will not include state and county taxes or registration. So you need to make sure that when you're looking at a car, you look at the car and you apply the taxes and registration that is due. Number two, as I mentioned, you can buy from any state in the US, and it's actually a fairly easy process. Now, you can buy a car in whatever state you like, you can go and collect it and drive it home, you can have it shipped to you. One of the reasons why you might want to look in different states is what I found personally, and I don't know whether this is just a sign of the times or just this moment in time, is cars on the East Coast are considerably cheaper than anything on the West Coast or the west side of the US, sometimes by $3,000 to $5,000 when you're looking in a $50,000 to $60,000 price range, which to me is significant. That's nearly the amount of tax that you're going to pay. Now, I don't know whether that's down to East Coast has more rain, I would assume, and the cars may be more worn or more exposed to weather than somewhere like Nevada or California, who knows, but that's what I found. So I was looking at a lot of cars over on that side. However, to get it shipped over here, significant costs, up to $2,000, or for me to fly and drive for 4 to 5 days, probably about the same. So I cut those all out of my search. The next place I looked was Texas, and oddly enough, if you look into odd parts of Texas, so not the big towns or cities like Dallas and Austin, you can actually find really good deals there. So I ended up looking at a place, I think it was called Amarillo, not really sure. And they were very similar prices to New York and New Jersey. So I actually started a transaction with somebody in Amarillo, Texas, and it turned out to be really easy. They take into account that you're only paying Nevada taxes. Also, their fees were very low. And this is the next point. Different states have different ways of managing what fees the dealership can charge you. So for example here, I don't know if we have a restriction, but it's very common for a dealership to charge you a documentation fee of $500 to $700. Some states have restrictions on that, so there is a maximum that they can charge you, and some states have no maximum. And where there are no maximums, there's usually an average price. When we bought our car here 3 years ago, they charged us $599. I spoke to a dealership, I can't remember exactly where now, but they wanted $899, which to me is a significant amount of money. However, the transaction that we are going through now with Amarillo, Texas, they have a maximum fee of $150, which is super reasonable considering they've got to send documents out to us, they have to do the registration. It's way more worth them doing it and me paying $150. Not that I get a choice, but then spend my time doing all of these things. If you're looking at buying a car in another state, be sure to check with the dealership and various other shippers if you're planning to ship the car to you, because what I found is prices could vary in the same state from about $1,000 to about $1,800. Now, all of the places I looked at were insured and bonded. It was just the case of they had different prices. Most of the ones that I looked at had very similar reviews, 4 to 5 stars, and most people got their vehicles in a timely fashion and undamaged. So you just need to make sure that you check and don't necessarily take the dealer's offer. Point number 3 of things to look out for, and my most frustrating one, is junk fees. For whatever reason here in the US, it seems to be absolutely rife with what I would personally call bait and switch. An example was somebody sent me a charge for lemon car protection. Now, you might not know what that term is, but if a car, let's say you buy a brand new car and it has the same fault, I think 3 or 5 times, I don't know exactly in the US, the exact same fault is considered a lemon car and the dealership has to buy it back from that first owner. Now, I'm looking at cars that are 2 to 4 years old, and I said to them, why is there a charge for lemon law protection on here? No other dealership has had that. And they said, oh, we put them on all of our cars to protect you. And I said, is that a charge you've added on, or is it part of your government requirement? And they avoided the question multiple times. And I think it was around $800, this extra charge. So in the end, I just cut them off. I would say the vast majority of dealerships that I contacted had all kinds of strange fees added on that weren't part of government fees or the price of the car, down to things like nitrogen filling your tires for $400 also, which is outrageous. $30 fine. Most of them will, or a lot of the big dealerships will do it for free, but let's say they charge you $30 to $50. They're charging you $400 for that. It's clearly a rip-off. It's so that they can advertise the price, hopefully get somebody through the door if you're not an internet buyer, or if you are an internet buyer and you don't necessarily know how to read the itemized invoice, or you don't ask the right questions, you just assume that the fees are correct. This is truly my biggest bugbear with the US. I have never had this experience in the UK where they've added on fees. Now, of course, if you go into a dealership, particularly if it's a large dealership, Audi, BMW, VW, once you go into the finance office, they're going to try and sell you all of the insurance products. Doesn't mean that they're bad or good. Some people get value out of having tire insurance or wheel insurance. We tend not to take it unless they're charging us a nominal fee, which is what we usually negotiate, or gap insurance, which can be really good. So if you're buying a brand new car and you're taking out a loan and you were to crash that car, there might be a gap between what you owe for the person that lent you the money, the finance company, and what you get back for in the price of the car once you write it off. That gap insurance is actually quite a good product because it will fill in the gap. Otherwise, you'll end up owing on top of the car. So your car gets written off and you still owe the finance company. So products like that can be useful for some people. That I understand. These fees are nothing to do with those. These are just made up fees so they can underprice the car, get you in, and then add on tons of fees at the back end, which goes as pure profit to the dealership. Number 4 is registration versus VIN. In the US, VIN is king. So I'm not sure how many people in the UK understand what a VIN number is. A VIN number is kind of like the serial number for the car, and it's usually on the logbook, as we call it, or the V5. It's usually stamped into various parts of the car. It's usually under the front windscreen. It's all around the car, and this is the serial number of the car. Most people don't know that in the UK, and even if you do know it, it's not something you ever really have to use unless your car gets stolen. In the UK, registration plate or license plate is king. We tend to use the registration. The reason for that is the registration stays with the car in the UK unless you put a private plate on. And even if you put a private plate on, the registration is still allocated to that car, because if you pulled your private plate off, the normal registration goes back on. In the US, it's very different. The registration is between you as an individual and that car. So if I was to sell my car, the registration comes off, the next person buys the car, they get a new registration, and so on, even if it's within the same state. So generally, when you're talking to a dealership about a car, when you're talking to your insurer about the car, they're going to ask for the VIN number and not the registration. Another difference here, at least to my knowledge, is in the US, you can register a car to multiple people. So both myself and Selena are registered on the car that we currently have, and we're both going to be registered on the car that's coming. In the UK, we've never known that we could do that. So every car that we've owned has been either assigned to myself or Selena, which to me is a little bit strange. I think that the US system is way better. Why, if you're in a relationship with somebody, would you not jointly own those things and also not jointly be liable for those things? And the final point on registration is it can be very costly here in the US for registration. I think the most similar thing that we have in the UK is our tax or road fund license, whatever they call it now. It's a reasonably complicated setup that we have both in the US and the UK. So depending on the value of the vehicle, depending on the emissions of the vehicle in the UK, will determine how much you have to pay. But assuming the car's over, I think £40,000, you're going to be paying probably £1,000 in the first year, and then about 570-ish, as I remember it, in the following years. So when I looked up the car that we've just bought now, it was going to cost £570 per year, which is about $700 a year. The exact same car here, I think, is $1,300 for its registration. It's not a brand new car, it's a 3-year-old car. So $1,300 versus $700, practically double. It does reduce down because I think they have a step down type system. So the further away you get from when you bought it, the more it steps down, but it doesn't quite work in the same way as the UK. Number 5, insurance. For me, because insurance is so expensive here compared to the UK, I really do think you have to consider it as part of your car ownership. So whether this is you're renting, leasing, purchasing a car with finance, it does have to be considered as part of that payment. For example, I did an insurance quote in the UK for exactly the same car, and it was between £1,100 and £1,200 for a year. The exact same car here, the car that we've purchased, is $1,400 per 6 months, therefore double. That's a lot of money. And remember, that's for each car that you own. So in the UK, we own 2 to 3 cars at any one time, and generally we'd be paying less than £1,000 per year for 2 cars. Here we're going to be paying, I think, nearly $2,000 every 6 months for these 2 cars, which for me is painful, but I guess America's different with its insurance. And finally, doing a vehicle check here has proved really easy. I know we have them in the UK and you can text a number and it'll give you a report. I know we probably do have Carfax as well in the UK, but there's lots of different services. Here I found that the vast majority of dealerships, if you're buying from one, provide the Carfax for free. And it's really good because it gives you a total overview of where the car's been, how many owners, whether it's ever had damage, written off. Obviously you're relying on this being reported, so if you've got unscrupulous people, you don't know, but that's not Carfax's fault. Also on there, it holds the service history, providing the dealership that has serviced it is signed up to Carfax. They generally put the history on there. And if the history isn't on there, you can usually email the dealer, which I have done, and said, can you give me, for this VIN number, can you give me the service that you have recorded for you? Which for me, I think I used it 3 or 4 times. I'd email the BMW dealership, they'd send it straight over to me, and I could match it up to the Carfax, make sure it was in the right location. And I found it really easy to get a great overview of the vehicle. So those are some of the differences that I found when purchasing a car in the US versus the UK. Hopefully I've given you a good starting point if you're considering purchasing a car in the US. Thanks for watching.